Hello, this is Terrence McNally. With a lawless president, a compromised Congress, the rise of disinformation, social and natural systems are under siege. Here's my 2017 conversation with Stephen Schwartz. He's tracked the rise of fascist and identitarian politics and theocratic right, and we talk about his book, 8 Laws of Change, How to Be an Agent of Personal and Social Transformation. Based on years of research, it offers a path toward nonviolent, compassionate, life-affirming change. Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to the third newly recorded episode of Free Forum. I'll be joined today by Stephen Schwartz, who puts out the daily Schwartz Report. He's also got a new book out, The 8 Laws of Change, which he terms an antidote to Trump. After hosting and producing this show weekly for 17 years, I stepped away from recording new live interviews a couple of years ago. And since then, I've dug into the archives to stream one of the best of my earlier interviews each week on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn. We're on Saturday and Sunday nights there. And podcasts of years of interviews are available to listen to anytime, anywhere, of course, on iTunes and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same site. Following the election of Donald Trump, however, I felt I no longer could resist the chance to explore the path forward in confronting him and his administration. And on Freeform, we've always explored the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work, based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. So first off today, I want to offer you a few websites for information on how to actively participate in the resistance to Trump and the movement toward the healthy, progressive future we so desperately need. And you can email me at temcnally, TEMCNALLY, at mac.com to get these websites and more information. Just let me know what you want. I want the websites. I want more information. I want to sign up for your weekly announcement of who we're going to talk to and what we're going to talk about, that sort of thing. So here's 6 sites that I recommend. Indivisibleguide.com. This is a pretty coordinated, pretty together folks who are looking at actions to take and a way to approach the opposition, and it's I think many of them are former staffers who have left the Beltway machine and now are working to help us take back society. Indivisibleguide.com, and then OurRevolution.com, which is the organization set up by the Bernie Sanders campaign once the campaign ended. OurRevolution.com, OURR, and then revolution. CourageCampaign.org is an organization in the state of California that is doing a great job, and they have an actual kind of a movement called Courageous Resistance. But you can find out information about that at the CourageCampaign.org. MoveOn.org, which had always been an online presence, going back to, if you recall, the organization started. Move On was first stop with the impeachment of Bill Clinton and let's move on to some serious business. So they've been at it that long. For the most of their time, they have been primarily an online organization, and they have realized that at this moment, things have to be, we need both online and in-person, both virtual and real action, and that's what they're working on now. It's MoveOn.org. There's an organization called 5calls.org, which will basically tell you phone calls, the most pressing phone calls to make to representatives and so on based on what's happening at the time, 5calls.org. And then specific to this moment, although it will come up again and again, certainly between now and 2018 and 2020, townhallproject.com. And what that is they will keep track of the town halls that all representatives are holding. And so you go to townhallproject.org and you can see when your congressman, your senator, or one nearby that you could attend, when they are holding town halls. And as we know from the Tea Party's experience, And as we've been reading about in the last week, because we're right now in a congressional recess when people come home to their constituents and hold town halls, showing up in person to ask questions, to challenge, to confront, or to support if you've got someone that's doing what you like. This is a powerful way of moving the needle. And what I've been reading about in the last few days is that Republican representatives have been either shocked or really made uncomfortable by the amount of progressive energy that's showing up at their offices and their town halls. And we see articles about people cutting them short. Congressmen saying that the fire code says I can only have 2 people in here at a time. People running away from their own town halls, et cetera, et cetera. As I say, this is one of the things that was very effective for the Tea Party in transforming the Republican Party. And obviously, it isn't just getting Republicans to not do their worst. It's to get Democrats to have more of a spine and follow the lead of the people they represent. Let me also just say a couple of things about, it's been a month since the last new show we did, which immediately followed the women's marches in Washington, all over the country, and in fact all over the world. And so let me just look at that last month. I would say on the one hand, it's terrible. The cabinet nominees are horrible, and almost all of them have gotten confirmed. Though the immigration ban was overturned by the courts, the ICE raids have begun. And there's a few stories every day about someone who's been caught in that web. And then there's just the general sort of bad behavior which undermines the role of government, the role of the United States in the world, et cetera, et cetera. And there's been plenty of that. On the other hand, I believe because of the chaos, the daily chaos, the media emergencies, if you will, that Donald Trump creates almost on a daily basis, it doesn't seem that they're nearly as efficient, whether we're talking about the administration or the Republican Congress. In other words, one could imagine you have a radical right president elected, you have a right-wing Republican Senate, House, et cetera, that things could move much more quickly in a bad direction. But it strikes me that because of all of the chaos, the having to walk things back, having to cover things over, having to explain and excuse and so on, they are not an efficient machine by any means. And so in some sense, the bad that they can do is slower than we might have anticipated. A question that I will sort of put to you and recommend we all pay attention to is, what are we missing that's going on, both good and bad? Because it is so difficult to disengage from the fog of the sort of insanity that comes out of the Trump administration on a daily basis. And I recommend we all put, as much as we want to be active and engaged in confronting and overcoming the Trump administration, we also want to pay attention to, as I said, what gets lost, because so much of the attention, our own, our friends, our colleagues, the media's, gets sucked up by this menace in the White House. I'm going to bring in my guest now. Stephan Schwartz is a distinguished consulting faculty member at Saybrook University, a research associate of the Laboratories for Fundamental Research, editor of the daily web publication SCHWARTZ.net. Schwartz, SCHWARTZ, report. SCHWARTZreport.net. And he's a columnist for the peer-reviewed research journal Explore. He's written more than 100 technical papers as well as articles for many publications, including Smithsonian, the Washington Post, the New York Times. He's the author of 4 books, and the latest is The 8 Laws of Change, How to Be an Agent of Personal and Social Transformation. Welcome, Stephan Schwartz, to Freeform.
Thank you very much.
Your work today naturally grows out of a lifetime of experiences. And in your case, I always ask people to talk a bit about their path to the work they're doing today. In your case, as someone who looks at trends, if you looked at your own life as that sort of thing, how has it evolved? How did you arrive at what you're doing today? And you can go back to any sort of turning point experiences, roads not taken, the moments of decision, that sort of thing, that has led you to where you are today.
Well, I guess the way to start this is to say 4 times in my life I have been involved with changing history. In the 50s and 60s, the civil rights movement, when I was a teenager and my early 20s, and basically I think my job was to get arrested. Anyway, I did it a number of times. In the 70s, I was the special assistant to the Chief of Naval Operations. I was invited to become the special assistant. I was a civilian, by a man named Elmo Zumwalt, and the task we were given, a small group of us, was to transform the conscription military of the Vietnam era, which wasn't working. I was a vet, so I had a very clear idea why it wasn't working, into what became the all-volunteer meritocracy that is the military today. And arguably, although the military is misused by civilians, the institution itself is arguably the largest meritocracy in the country. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It doesn't matter where your family, came from. It doesn't matter how much money you've got. So it doesn't matter what gender you are. Anyway, so the transformation of the military, and then in the 80s, a small group of us began what came to be known as Track 2 diplomacy or citizen diplomacy. We created back channels between the Soviet Union and the United States that would allow exchanges to go on very quietly and sort of unofficially, that played, as both governments acknowledged, a significant role in the end of the Cold War. And then through all of that, the consciousness movement, the idea that we are more than animated meat, and the first cousin of the consciousness movement, the environmental movement. So, plus, and this is an important part, I lived through Watergate as a member of a senior staff, and so and was at that point doing some work for the White House, and saw what corrupt government is like from the inside. In fact, I walked away from a career in government because as I came home one night and after I had just come from a meeting, and 2 days later, Jeb Magruder was indicted. He had been the chair of the meeting, and I said to my wife, I can no longer tell the good guys from the bad guys. We need to go find something else to do. So the government paid me initially in this business about transforming the military. I got interested in social outcome research because when we were trying to change a large institution, you have to put aside the ideologies and theologies and philosophies and just look at the social outcome data. If you do this, what do you get? And the transformation of the military was very much a product of looking at social outcome data. I mean, for instance, the senior management of the military thought there was a huge drug trial, but for those of us that were actually involved with it and got the data, what we discovered was we didn't have a big drug problem amongst junior enlisted, which was what everybody was completely assured was what the problem was. So I got interested in social outcome data. And I stopped paying attention to politics per se, except from an anthropological point of view, and really started looking at if you do this policy, what happens? And that's what drove the creation of the Schwartz Report 25 years ago, and the column that I write and stuff that I write for other magazines and publications like Huffington Post. was that if we're going to make a change for the better, what really ought we to be basing our decisions on? And it's not philosophy or ideology or political partisanship or any of that. I propose that what we should be looking at is social outcome data, because that actually gives us facts that tell us what works. And the other thing that I learned in the course of this, which really was surprising, particularly when you look at most of the political discourse, is that things which are based on creating well-being, on fostering well-being, are inevitably cheaper. That's a big one. They are cheaper, they're more productive, they're more efficient, they're easier to implement, they are more pleasant to live under, and they're more enduring. So the question that I'm always fascinated with when I listen to politicians talk about their theories and their philosophies is, why don't you actually stick to facts? Because if you do that, you discover very quickly that those things which foster well-being are always the right choice.
You mentioned that the military is a meritocracy where many factors don't matter. I have spoken to people fairly high up in the military, fairly responsible positions in the military, who have said that that used to be true, but that religion, that is to say the Christian religion, has taken on an increasingly powerful place in the military, and that it is no longer blind to religion. Are you aware of that? Do you have any comment on that, etc.?
Yes, actually, I was going to get into that in a minute, because that's an example. That's an example, a sort of negative proof of what I'm talking about. Yes, when the one thing that we did, I've been thinking about writing an essay on this, as a matter of fact. The one thing that we just didn't anticipate when we were doing all of these programs to gender blind, racially blind, religiously blind, we did not anticipate the infiltration of the American military by the theocratic right. And what happened was, I've just begun doing research on this. The theocratic right, the fundamentalist Christians who sort of captured Christianity, realized that the chaplain corps of the military, it wasn't seen as a great career path by most clerics, but the right recognized that by placing clerics in the chaplain corps of the military, that they could get tremendous influence over the young people that are in the military. Remember, most of these people are in their teens and late 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Young people who come into the military, and it's in many ways a very good career path, and so they stay with it. And the theocratic right understood that by taking over the chaplain corps, they could basically develop a propaganda organization that would encourage people to embrace this kind of weird Christianity that we have today.
Yeah, Stephen, one thing I would...
very much to do with Jesus' teaching.
Exactly. One thing I would suggest is that the wisdom of that move by theirs is that these young people are coming into the military, they have volunteered, they're looking at it as a career, and they are impressionable, and the military is set up to socialize them, to teach them, correct? In other words, religion then just becomes another sort of layers onto what is already a system of socialization and training.
Yes, I mean, most of the military come from very specific groups of people today. That's the other thing. As I say, I've just begun really digging into this data. So what you've got is a lot of young people, many of whom don't have a lot of opportunities and see the military correctly as a stable place to work, and you can make a career. And you know, I mean, you go in at 18 and you come out at, say, 37, 38. You're still a relatively young person, and you've now got a guaranteed income for the rest of your life, and you have health care, you have certain travel benefits. In many ways, the military is, for a rural or a low-income rural family, a military career is actually a step up, and the military is absolutely designed. I wouldn't think of it so much as socialized, but the military is designed in its social structure to produce a sense of coherence, a sense of we're in this together. You know, because being only a small percentage actually go into combat, but it infuses the whole organization with a certain point of view. And it's important that you know that the guy on your left and the guy on your right are going to cover your back just as you are expected to cover theirs. And so the whole process is designed to create a kind of coherent team intention.
Yeah, I would think that if you compared it to, for instance, someone goes into a corporation, while corporations hope to have strong cultures, or if they go into academia, you know, universities have a lot of allegiance and a lot of, you know, fellow spirit within them, but there's nothing like, aside from the religious orders themselves, there's probably nothing like the military for creating that kind of cohesion and the young person being amenable to, you know, being putty in the hands of those that are forming it. So it seems to me it's a very wise strategy. So the research that you say you've begun to do is showing you that the theocratic right has made this a strategy and my sense is being very effective with it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. No, it's a conscious strategy. I mean, people like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell and, you know, all of these sort of these individuals who redefined Christianity. I mean, the sort of the capturing of Jesus, as it were, where you invade and take over the structure, and you transform what the real point is from the original teachings. I mean, if you look at, you know, love God and love your brother, and that is the whole of the law and the prophets, Jesus' statement, I mean, that doesn't sound at all like the kind of thing you hear from the theocratic right today, which has morphed into an organization which uses the language of religion, but which has something quite different in mind. And it has aligned itself with organizations like the NRA, for instance, so that there is a kind of combination of both religious and political rightist perspectives, and about, well, depending on who you look at, somewhere between 35 and 40% of the country completely aligns with this. In fact, the thing that I'm really concerned about in terms of trends is that, you know, Winston Churchill said the United Kingdom and the United States were two countries separated by a common language. And I think what we're seeing is that the blue states and the red states are really two world views separated by a common language, because we've even gotten to a point now where the words don't mean the same thing.
I'll tell you what.
You listen to Trump talk, and I mean, Trump is creating a new kind of political language, very much as the theocratic right, as these fundamentalist Christians who had this very strange Darby-esque view of Christianity that took place beginning with it started with the radio preachers, but which has transformed Christianity. I mean, we now have mainstream Christianity and fundamentalists, but the fundamentalist Christianity is by far the larger part. So and certainly the more vital part.
Yes, and the more influential.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at where politicians go to speak. You can see where they think it's important.
That's right. Exactly.
But in any case, this alignment of what has created the theocratic right, which is a blend of right-wing politics, racism, white supremacism, and all couched in the language of Christianity.
Okay, what I want to return soon to what in reading your work over the years, the two concepts that jump out at me are the theocratic right and the Great Schism, which you've been alluding to just now. We will get back to those in a second. Let me ask you one other thing that was prompted by what you were saying about the military, and that is you were saying it is a meritocracy. Which sounds awfully good. I happened to look yesterday at a series of articles in Harper's following the election in which they asked, for a dozen thinkers to, write essays about what this meant and so on and how it happened and all of that. And the one that struck me the most fascinating so far was, and I can't even remember the writer's name, but what you said triggered it. He said that meritocracy, in a way, has contributed to the schism. He said that it used to be, or just that once the smarter rise to the top, once college education and advanced education becomes the ticket to the top, and once that becomes sort of society-wide, you open the way for one white non-college to be left out and to feel different from and separated from, and then that ends up if those same folks, as we know, are recruited, romanced, etc., paid attention to, seduced by either the theocratic right or right-wing politicians or a Trump campaign, that this actually there is a downside to the meritocracy in that it builds this separation. Any thoughts on that?
Well, if I understand what you're saying, I haven't read the piece, so
Right.
I'm just going on what you're saying.
Right, exactly.
That strikes me as a misunderstanding of what meritocracy means. What's happening in the educational system in the United States, well, there's several major trends. One trend, of course, is the privatization trend, where we turn public schools into profit centers. I mean, let me say, actually, before I say anything else, the central problem, I think, that the United States faces is that, in complete contradiction to what the founders intended, we have created a society that has only one social priority, and that's profit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything is calculated on, will it make a profit? And so when you create a society in which the whole structure of the society is, will a small group of people make a profit for doing this, then, of course, privatization of prisons and schools and everything else. Military, by the way, the military has been overwhelmingly privatized. I mean, the only thing we really leave to the military now is shooting and getting shot. I mean, as we all know from the Iraq War, the Halliburton, for instance, corporations now handle the mess, the food services,
the logistics.
They handle maintenance services. Yeah. We have what amount to mercenaries that we hire to do unsavory things that we don't want to actually ask troops to do, the sort of Blackwater approach to the military. So, I mean, this idea of privatizing everything and is a perversion of what the founders intended, and meritocracy meant what Benjamin Franklin meant by it, let's put it that way, is that a person who was an ethical, hardworking person who fulfilled their own potential and who helped others do the same would rise up in the system. That was what he called virtuous citizens.
Mm.
And and in fact, there are about I guess there's probably just about 3,000 kids who are getting education either going to college or getting access to museum things, and funded by Benjamin Franklin, who invented micro-lending to make that possible. I mean, we think about micro-lending, Muhammad Yunus got the Nobel Prize for creating micro-lending, but Benjamin Franklin actually invented micro-lending in 1789, and for 200 years, it funded Boston and Philadelphia in all kinds of ways, because he set up all of the philanthropy in the United States is due to Benjamin Franklin.
Excellent. Hello, this is Terrence McNally. You're listening to my 2017 conversation with Stephen Schwartz about his book, 8 Laws of Change, How to Be an Agent of Personal and Social Transformation. Based on years of research, it offers a path toward nonviolent, compassionate, life-affirming change. This is Freeform. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Stephen Schwartz, author of The 8 Laws of Change, and Stephen puts out the daily Schwartz Report, which I recommend. It's usually 4 articles with that he has found somewhere, in the media, in the web. Sometimes not even yesterday's article. It might be that to make the case for a certain trend, he goes back a few months, a few years, and finds something that was significant. But you can learn more at SCHWARTZ-8.net or the Schwartz Report Facebook page. So to pull the sort of 2 strands we've been talking about together, the one point you're saying the most significant fact, if you will, about the United States as a society right now is that the overwhelming criteria for action and the overwhelming motivation is the profit motive. And everything else is secondary. So then when we talk about the theocratic right, or we talk about the Great Schism, or we talk about fundamentalists, or we talk about all of that, all of those things would be less significant if they didn't serve the purposes of the profit motive.
Absolutely.
All of them have been enrolled as ways to further the few pursuit of profit.
Absolutely. I mean, we were speaking of education. I mean, you look at the Koch brothers. You can criticize their political views, but what they're doing, I mean, it's perfectly legal. They are endowing colleges who are willing to put in professors who teach a certain point of view. They have a very specific political agenda. You look at organizations like ALEC, the American Legislative, the Exchange Council. I think I have that right. ALEC, anyway, that drafts legislation that's introduced in a variety of state legislatures. What's happening in this country, and we are paying a huge price for this, is that when you make profits your only social priority, you actually produce a system which is much more expensive, much less efficient, much less innovative, because everything is decided from the sort of what's the effect on the quarterly profit. And if you look at, just to give you an example, in the second debate, the Democratic Party debate before the 2016 elections, Bernie Sanders made a comment about Norway, and which was much picked up in the press and much hooing and hawing about it. Well, I got interested in that question of, he was saying we should look to a country like Norway to see some models that might be better. And so I actually did that. I took 16 social outcome designators or measurements, obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, education, sexually transmitted diseases, maternal mortality, infant mortality, health care, longevity, average income, incarceration, literacy, and I compared the social outcomes in Norway with the social outcomes in the United States. And I've written this up, and anybody that's interested can go to either SCHWARTZReport.net, or they can go to academia.edu and search on my name. My papers are all there. Or they can go to Explore Journal and all my stuff, a lot of my stuff is there. But in any case, I'll just give you one. Just to make the point, you can assume that the other 16 play out pretty much the same. If you look at Norway, Norway has the 11th best healthcare system in the world, according to the World Health Organization. Now, it's not the best, it's the 11th. And they spend about 7.6% of their GDP maintaining that healthcare system. In contrast, in the United States, we rank 37th. We are at the bottom of the pile in terms of healthcare. We don't really have a healthcare system. We have an illness profit system.
Exactly.
But in any case, so we rank 37th according to the World Health Organization, and we spend 17.6% of our GDP on healthcare. So my question was, what would happen if we could just get to as good as Norway? Not the best, 11th. If we could just get to 11th and we could spend the same proportion of the GDP that they spend, so 7.6%. Well, the answer is we would save annually, $1.3 trillion.
Yep.
And that $1.3 trillion would send all of the kids who want to go to college, and would provide elder care and prenatal care and early childhood care. I mean, this stuff, Terence, gets so preposterous when you actually get into the outcome data. One other example. In Finland, they started in Finland, now they do it in a number of European countries. Strangely enough, New Jersey has just begun doing this, and they are following the lead of a medical center in St. Louis to make it possible for a woman who has a child, if she wants it, doesn't have to do it, but if she wants it, to apply for the baby box. And the baby box is a cardboard box with a little mattress in the bottom of it. The box itself can become a crib, and the little box contains everything that a child needs in his first year, or her first year. So, I mean, it's got, little jumpers and binkies and, all the stuff little kids need. And any mother that wants it can apply for it. And as I say, this started in Finland, and now Norway, Holland's doing it. Lots of places are doing it now. But it has not been present in the United States until just very recently. Already, we can see the effect. Now, this little box costs on average $76. If you look at the cost of health care, particularly for mothers who do not have health insurance, or do not have adequate health insurance, or adequate access to proper health clinics, for instance, what you discover is that that child is going to cost on average $57,000 in the first year, whereas for $76 you can eliminate most of those costs. I just want to emphasize this point again. Wellness-oriented social policies are always, I cannot find a counterexample anywhere in the world. If anybody finds one, please send it to me. They always are cheaper, more efficient, more effective, more productive, easier to implement, nicer to live under, and more enduring.
Okay. Now, by the way, you're familiar with, I would imagine, with the spirit level, the work by let me see, Pickett and Dickinson, and
yes.
What they found. And anyone who wants to hear my interview with them, go to the website and put in the spirit level or put in Dickinson and Pickett. They found that the more equal the society in terms of wealth, the better things are for everyone, not just the poor, but also the wealthy. And that the outliers, and the U.S. is absolutely the outlier in terms of inequality, also end up being the outliers in terms of negative social consequences. and that just goes right with what you're saying. Let me jump back a second, Stephen, just to talk about something that I found fascinating in that you started doing the Schwartz report, you say, about 25 years ago?
Yeah.
And the goal is to follow trends, to look at social outcomes, to see where we're going and how we move toward greater wellness and so on. I got that. And my experience of reading you was that you really set out with the intention to be nonpartisan and perhaps even to not talk about politics much, to sort of find your information outside of the political realm in the world of innovation, social innovation, technological innovation, and so on when you're looking at trends. And what I have watched happen, and I'd like you to just talk about this a little bit, is that you have been forced by circumstances to become, for your entries at least, for your information that you're distributing, to become more and more political and partisan. Can you talk about how that has happened for you and what that means?
Yes, I don't think I'm more partisan, Terrence. I do the same thing I've always done.
No, but what I mean is the report.
I do a data-based, a science-based social outcome newsletter or web publication, whatever the term of art is, whose purpose is to make people aware of the effects of social policies on well-being. I believe the function of the state should be to produce well-being from the individual to the family to the community, the nation, and the planet itself. And so I look for science-based information. I have been forced to get involved with politics. I don't do polemics. I don't do, you don't see just sort of polemical essays. But I have been forced to get into politics because we have made political decisions in this country which are so inimical to the well-being of the people in the country. In fact, one of the fascinating things that I'm doing research on right now is why, and I think I know the answer, but why is it that people vote against their own self-interest? I mean, it's quite amazing if you think about it. I mean, you look at Donald Trump now. I mean, almost every policy that he is proposing is going to have a negative effect
on the people who supported him.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are voting against their own self-interest. Now, I think I know why they're doing that, but nonetheless, I was dragged kicking and screaming into covering certain aspects of politics because it was having such a huge effect on the social outcome data.
Mm-hmm. And so the theocratic right, the Great Schism, all of that, you end up talking about things like comparing the policies and the outcomes in a state like Kansas, where Sam Brownback actually set out to say, I'm going to, this will be an experiment, and you'll see how well our policies do, our right-wing policies do,
yes,
versus another state in the Midwest, or most outstandingly, versus a state like California, which goes in the completely opposite direction.
Exactly. Well, I mean, Sam Brownback and Jerry Brown come into office at the same time, and Jerry Brown inherits a state which was in huge deficit problems, financially in very shaky ground. The educational system was declining and it was very diminished. There was a great unemployment. There was an enormous amount of confusion. There were laws that favored small groups to the detriment of large groups, and Sam Brownback came into power to a state that's always been conservative, but has been very stable, that had a good credit rating and had a decent educational system, and not very exciting or original, but stable. And now you look at them 7-8 years later, and what you see is California is now in surplus. They lead the way in climate remediation. They lead the way in the transition out of the carbon energy era into the non-carbon energy era.
They lead the way in
the educational system is back and is leading the country. And you look at Kansas, They've had their credit rating downgraded 3 times. The educational system is in chaos. Companies are leaving Kansas to move over the border to Missouri simply because it's so unpleasant for them to do business in Kansas. Sam Brownback very explicitly said, I'm going to show you why my right-wing political and economic ideas are the way to go. And it has been a disaster. In fact, it's such a disaster that he no longer issues the reports that they used to issue because he doesn't want people to know what's really going on. Or you could look at Wisconsin and Minnesota. That's another example. Scott Walker in Wisconsin, Mark Dayton in Minnesota. You could look at, how this plays out in sort of day-to-day life. A woman in Louisiana, for instance, or Kentucky, has 5 years less life expectancy than a woman in Washington or Vermont.
Amazing.
When you vote against
life and
your
death.
Own self-interest, as people do, you really are playing with your life.
Yeah. You were writing, I believe, the 8 Laws of Change, well before the 2016 campaign and before Trump's election. Talk a bit about how you arrive at what you call the 8 Laws of Change and why you believe they map a pathway forward from the Trump era to an era of well-being.
Well, I wrote the 8 Laws of Change, which you can get off of, you can either go to my website, StepHAN, or you can go to Amazon, or you can go to your local bookstore and get a copy of the 8 Laws of Change. As I said when we started, I have been involved with changing history 4 times. And I began looking at how that happened and what worked and what didn't work. And because I've been tracking this trend of the Great Schism trend that I see happening between the really 2 separate worldviews emerging in the United States, I could foresee Trump. I didn't always know who it was going to be, but when Trump started, and I could see the kind of rallies that he was getting, and the kind of the whole shift of the right-wing media disinformation operation to support him, I thought this guy could easily come into power, and we needed an antidote. The 8 Laws of Change is basically an antidote to Donald Trump. And it is based on my analysis of about 200 social transformational movements occurring between about 1900 and 2014, when I started writing the book. And what I've discovered in the course of doing this research was that all the social movements that were successful had certain things in common. They actually they figured out, one way or another, they worked out what I came to think of as the 8 Laws. Because if you followed these 8 laws, then you were much more likely for your social movement to be successful. And I also discovered that beneath even that's a social expression. At the individual level, I discovered what I have called the quotidian choice. Quotidian means sort of mundane, ordinary, daily. And it's essentially the little choices that you make all during the course of the day, which essentially are kind of votes. When you go into the supermarket to buy a toothpaste or toilet paper or cat food, are you aware of the company who produced the product that you're going to buy? And most people aren't. In fact, most people don't even think of it as a decision. Oh, I'm going to go in and get some toothpaste, is the way they think about it. They don't think, does this company, is it decent to its employees? Is it environmentally aware? Does it have policies about pollution or toxicity that are life-affirming? That sort of thing. So the first thing was the quotidian choice, and that's very easily stated. Every day you make hundreds of choices. If you look at the choices first of all, be aware you're making a choice. As I say, most people aren't. Be aware you're making a choice, and of the options that are available to you, consistently choose the one which is the most life-affirming and compassionate and fostering of well-being. Now, none of the choices may be good choices, but inevitably one of them is slightly more life-affirming than the others. Now, what happens is when people do this, and an example, I can give you a very specific example. If you look at the difference between gay and LGBT, now, we made a change about 2 years ago. You can go back and look at the Google word search, and you'll see their graphs of how often people search on terms. You can see that about 2 years ago, there was a shift in consciousness in the United States. It wasn't that the president got on television and made a statement, or that they passed a law, or that anybody came out publicly and said, well, this is what we're going to do. And that was to stop saying gay and to start saying LGBT. And that's not only a change of term, that's a change of concept of what it is to be a human being and what gender and sexuality mean to human beings. And it's quite different between gay and LGBT. So that's one of those shifts that was made not because anybody passed a law about it, but because individuals made individual choices. Marriage equality is another one. Smoking is another one. I mean, when you and I were boys, you went to somebody's house, and on their coffee table there was a pack of cigarettes and an ashtray and one of those Ronson lighters.
Yep,
clicked that
absolutely.
When you were a kid. You don't ever see that anymore, and the reason is not because they passed a law, but because people made individual choices. So that's the first part. The second thing that I suddenly realized as I was doing this research was that there's no power on earth more powerful than the collective intention of a large group of people. And we actually know how big the group has to be to cause social change, and that's 10%. The research shows whenever there's 10% of any cohort, whether it's a church group or a school group or a country, that shift in consciousness, that you see the whole shift occurs, the whole society shifts. And in fact, Donald Trump's election is an example of this, a kind of negative proof of the idea. So then my next question was, well, what happens when all those individual choices sort of band together? And I got interested in this principally by studying the Quakers and the abolitionists. There's less than 87,000 Quakers in the United States, and over the course of history, back to the colonial period, less than 500,000 Quakers. It's such a tiny little group. Most people don't know a Quaker, don't have any idea what they believe, are never going to meet a Quaker. If you don't live in a few areas in the United States, like up in Pennsylvania, I mean, you just never meet Quakers. And yet, this tiny little group of people, when you look at all of the major social transformational changes that have occurred going back to the colonial period, abolition, prison reform, public education, women's suffrage, child care,
civil rights in the 60s.
All of that, the nuclear freeze, the environmental movement. They all began with a small group of Quakers. The Quakers were key players in the foundations of those movements. And as I read the information out of the abolitionists and the Quakers, particularly when I got started, as I said, these 8 laws began to emerge. And I'll just go through the laws very quickly.
Right.
Law number 1, the individuals individually and the group collectively must share a common intention. Anybody that's ever belonged to a committee knows that that's hard to do, but you have to get to a common intention. That's what made the civil rights movement work. That's what made the anti-Vietnam War movement work. Everybody had a common intention. Law number 2, the individuals in the group may have goals, but they may not have cherished outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I would read these abolitionist diaries, and they would say things like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but slavery is an awful moral evil, and I'm going to work to make it happen. But they were very specific in saying, I don't know how it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have cherished outcomes. They did have a goal. Law number 3, the individuals in the group must accept that their goal may not be reached in their lifetimes and be okay with this.
That one struck me. That's a powerful one in our current culture of short-term thinking, short-term profit, etc.
Absolutely. And yet, if you read the abolitionists, you read the early days of the environmental movement going back to Rachel Carson, they say, well, I don't know if we're ever going to get there in my lifetime, but I'm going to keep working for it because it's the right thing to do. So law number 4, The individuals in the group must accept that they may not get either credit or acknowledgement for what they've done and be authentically okay about this. Again, you see people who are involved in these successful social transformation movements, they, over and over again, they say, I'm doing this, nobody will ever know what I've done except maybe my family, but it's the right thing to do, and so I'm doing it. Law number 5, each person in the group, regardless of gender, religion, race, or culture, must enjoy fundamental equality even as the various roles in the hierarchy of the effort are respected. Well, this is why I think the Occupy movement didn't succeed. No one ever came forward, and they did it deliberately. I understand why they did it. I've talked to them, but it didn't catch because there was no Martin Luther King, there was no Gandhi. We are high-order primates, and we organize hierarchically. That's just we're hardwired for it. So you have to acknowledge fundamental equality of everybody, but you can't run everything on a committee.
Mm-hmm.
So law number 6, the individuals in the group must forswear violence in word, act, or thought. This is, for me personally, this is the hard one because when I see people being abused, I don't always have happy thoughts. But what you discover is if you look at these 200 and some movements that I examined over the course of the last, from, as I say, about 1900 to 2014, what you see is that violent movements only succeed about 25% of the time. That's actually not a good way to create social change. Violent movements only succeed about 25% of the time, and then only in part, whereas nonviolent movements succeed 75% of the time, and they're much more enduring and encompassing.
Very good.
Law number 7, the individuals in the group and the group itself must make their private selves consistent with their public postures.
Authenticity.
Authenticity. I mean, we all know people that put themselves up as moral leaders, and then it turns out, they're doing right. Law number 8, the individuals in the group and the group collectively must always act from the beingness of life-affirming integrity. That's this quotidian choice. And I got that from Thoreau, who gave it to Gandhi, who gave it to King.
So the beingness, they must always act from the beingness of life-affirming integrity. That means not from a set of rules, not from even a set of commandments, but from being a person of life-affirming integrity. That is just who you are, and that is where your actions come from.
This is this quotidian choice thing.
Yep.
That you consistently always choose the compassionate and life-affirming option of the options available to you. I mean, if you you say, well, I don't have any power, I don't have any official position, I don't have a lot of money, so what can I do? Who cares? I don't even want to vote. The whole thing makes me sick to my stomach. Blah blah blah. But the truth of the matter is that if you look, for instance, at how Gandhi got independence for India, a very significant historic event, by the way, because it is the only time that a country got independence without a war.
Mm-hmm.
He did that because he told his people, he was asked right before he was assassinated, a reporter came up and asked him, how did you force the British to leave India? India was the crown jewel of their empire. They were one of the most powerful countries on earth. How did you force them to leave India without a war? And his answer was, it's not what we did that mattered, although that mattered. It's not what we said that mattered, although that mattered. It was the nature of our character that led the British to choose to leave India.
Okay, we've got to choose to leave this conversation, Stephen, at that point. But to give Mahatma Gandhi the last word is fine with me.
Me too.
So thank you. What we've done is we've looked at some of the trends you've been following and finally where they've led you in terms of if you were going to sit down with a young person today and say, what do I do? What do I do? You'd say, look at these 8 laws, and that'll help you figure out what to do and act in conformity with these. So again, the website to learn more is schwartzreport.net or the Schwartz Report Facebook page. That's SCHWARTZ Report. Thank you, Stephen Schwartz. Keep up your good work.
Okay, thank you, Terrence.
Okay. The book, again, is The 8 Laws of Change. For this conversation and many other interviews, articles, transcripts of interviews, and to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerrenceMcNally.net or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. Terrence McNally is TERRENCEMCNALLY, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement of upcoming guests and issues, and usually about 5 or 6 articles relevant to the moment, sign up at my site or email me at TEMcNally, TEMCNALLY, at mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast on iTunes. You can find years of podcasts at my site or iTunes, and you can listen anytime, anywhere. They include Michael Lewis, Jeremy Scahill, Robert Reich, Van Jones, Connie Rice, Greg Boyle, you name it. Thanks to G, my engineer, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all to you, my listeners. I look forward to being with you again soon, and please share this podcast widely.